Something unusual happened one day recently when screenwriter Benjamin Law turned up at a psychologist's office.
I said to my family, I'm going in for this diagnosis, for ADHD because I think it's possible I might have it. And the uniform response was, for sure. And I was like, do all these people know something about myself that I don't?
It was a diagnosis Ben didn't expect and certainly didn't plan for. This is Curveball and I'm Kelly Reardon. This is the podcast about what happens when life takes an unexpected turn. Today, Benjamin Law, writer, screen creator, public thinker, queer Asian Australian trailblazer. He's a Survivor contestant and even a Martha Stewart interviewer. In the beachside suburb where he grew up, Benjamin Law didn't see himself in books or on TV. So Ben did the next best thing. He wrote himself into those books and TV shows. From Queensland teen to celebrated cultural voice, Benjamin Law's story is one of audacity, artistry, and staying grounded even when things go a little sideways. Welcome to Curveball, Ben.
Thanks, Kel. You make me sound like Barack Obama. I have audacity, the audacity of hope. I like that.
Let's start in suburban Queensland where you grew up on the Sunshine Coast. Teenage Ben, can you paint us a picture of what it was like growing up there in the 90s?
I could paint you a picture, but it's not a flattering one. I mean, physically, the picture was like a lot of acne and braces. But in terms of me in that broader environment, look, we're talking about the Sunshine Coast of the 80s and 90s, which is geographically such a beautiful place, right? But in terms of multiculturalism, probably not quite where a lot of the rest of Australia is. So my parents moved there in the mid-1970s, which is wild because neither of them can swim. Why raise a family by the beaches? And then I was born in the 1980s. And when I was growing up, to your point before, we grew up in a pre-internet age. So it was very much about print media, about radio, about TV, about magazines, my first love. And you didn't really see Asian people on screen. You didn't see us in stories, about Australian stories at least. And when I was in my neighbourhood growing up, I didn't see them on the street. So I thought, we are very much alone in the world. And it wasn't until later when, we'd start going to Brisbane and then later in my life where I visited bigger Australian cities, I realised, actually Australia is quite multicultural, quite Asian actually, but I just didn't really feel that growing up.
And this would have been at the time during the rise of Pauline Hanson. So I imagine even the hostility towards Asians in particular was quite strong. Did you feel that at the time?
Yeah, well, that was a turning point, if we're talking about turning points, because I remember at primary school, I feel like I was the beneficiary of this feel-good 1988 World Expo multiculturalism. We embraced the world, we embraced different flavours. There was a lot of multiculturalism on Sesame Street, for instance. So even though I was the only, Asian kid in my year level, basically, I think maybe there were two others growing up. I didn't really have a problem at my school, at least. I gave the other kids chopstick lessons. They were really interested in my food because, frankly, it tasted better. It came with a bit of cachet. But when Pauline Hanson gave her maiden speech in 1996, that was the year that I entered high school. And I remember the tenor of the conversation really changing. I remember my friends would even say things to me she's basically right. You should have to speak English if you're going to be in this country. And we are getting too Asian. But don't worry, Ben, because we don't see you as Asian. And it was a lot to process as a young person because you take it as a compliment in a messed up way that they see me like them. But then also if they don't see me as Asian, what do they see me as? And when they're talking about migrants that don't speak English, they're talking about, my grandmother who migrated here, hit the ground running to work, to raise a family and didn't have the luxury of time to learn English very well and still paid her taxes. So you're right in that, the 1990s was this tense time, and I remembered like a family relative, an uncle of ours, was bashed in an anti-Asian hate crime in that period on the Sunshine Coast. Didn't report it to the police as such because you felt that fear that everyone else was out to get you. So you held on to that as a young person.
So you're growing up in this quite idyllic Sunshine Coast beach, everyone's wearing billabong and Quicksilver.
Yeah, you're describing me.
And you're watching things like Home and Away on television. What was your relationship like with the ocean at that time as a teenager?
Oh, deep fear, profound horror and hostility. And I remember in our senior years in high school, we had the option of doing an elective subject. You could do crochet or lawn bowls or something. And I took on surf lifesaving because I thought this was going to be the period where I became confident in the water.
And also you would get a starring role on Home and Away.
Which I desperately wanted. That's right.
Still time.
Exactly. Look at this face. It's ageless. But I enrolled in that thinking, I'll get confident in the water. And I just remembered it was me, the scrawny Asian kid of my year level, and Ceci, the Brazilian exchange student, who had misguidedly signed up for this elective, and we were actually the ones who needed saving. Like, we could barely swim. Why had we done this? So I really didn't like the water growing up. I was a really poor swimmer. Swimming carnivals were mandatory, as they often are throughout Queensland, right? And I would be the Asian kid who would do the novelty race. So for all the kids who were not confident swimmers, you would have to compete in at least one race, and the novelty race was all of you on a flotation device paddling through while everyone else jeered and laughed at you. And I don't think I won any of those either.
How has your relationship with the ocean now changed? Because it looks dramatically different these days.
I was talking with my boyfriend the other day, and I think we've kind of come to the same conclusion, which is a lot of the things that we hated growing up, you actually come back to and come to love. And for me, that's the ocean. And what I realized when I moved to Sydney was that it wasn't the water that I hated. It wasn't the ocean that I hated. It was probably my relationship to my childhood home, really, the neighborhood. That's a very different kind of beach culture. The jocks are all there to prove their worth in the waves, and I didn't have that skill, that physique, that look. But in Sydney, the beaches are much more, diverse. And I mean that in that the beaches themselves are diverse. You can get like a women's only pool. You can get like a beach in a pretty multicultural part of town. You've got like really big dudes wearing the tiniest Speedos. You've got nudist beaches. And I think in that I realized, there's kind of a beach for everyone. And actually, as I was leaving Brisbane, I got quite determined to swim better, and I became a competent swimmer. I could do 50 laps 50 meters without stopping, which was a huge achievement for me. And then in Sydney, I got stroke correction classes. And then I got
As an adult?
As an adult. Mm. And then I got more and more confident to the point where I was doing a K in the pool with stops and then a K without stops. And I was like, maybe I could do this in the sea. So now every year I do an ocean swim. I train throughout spring to do a 2K swim. My friends are convinced I can do a 5K one. I'm not sure about that, but I can swim 2Ks in the ocean nonstop.
So part of finding yourself as a teenager was through writing. Was it always the plan for you to become a writer and a journalist, or was it more, a hobby, a form of escape for you?
I wasn't actually a huge writer when I was growing up at all.
Really?
Yeah, I could do English quite well. I could write essays. I don't feel this passion for writing. But what I did always have was a passion for reading. And I was surrounded by books growing up. I'm one of 5, so my mum really needed low maintenance ways of taking up our energy and focus. So she knew that if I had books, I'd be quiet for a very long time, which is unusual for me. I'm quite a loud kid. And so I loved books growing up. Then when I was a teenager, I don't think I really got into like the great YA that's pumped out now. But the magazine market was huge, and I just lived at the newsagents. Eventually, I'd work in a news agency as well. Like, I just loved magazines. And at the time, I still know this fact randomly, but Australia was the biggest per capita readership of magazines in the world. We loved magazines as a nation, and I definitely did. I read Juice and Rolling Stone and HQ, like anything on glossy print, The Face from the UK and Q Magazine, Spin. You know, I was a big music head, but a lot of those magazines had articles about the environment or politics, counterculture. I thought that was really interesting. And on the Sunshine Coast, I think it was my main access to a world beyond my little neighbourhood. So I never had this dream to be a writer, but I was a really big reader. In fact, my dream when I was growing up was to be an actor on Home and Away, which was completely delulu looking back. But as you say, there's still time. So when I graduated high school, I auditioned for NIDA and QT, got a little bit, but not all the way. Their loss, frankly. But I was confronted with what I wanted to study at university. And I thought about journalism, but I knew I didn't want to do the hard news daily journalism. I wanted to tell stories, for want of a better / wankier word. And I really wanted to write the kind of stories that I was reading in magazines, you know, like meaty 4,000-word features about things that I thought were interesting, interviewing people, accessing people's lives, you know, their deepest, darkest secrets. That was the stuff that I wanted to be doing. So I took a punt and I enrolled in a creative writing degree where I learned a lot about writing, and that's what I ran with. But the seeds weren't necessarily there as a youngster. I didn't think writer, but I did think reader.
So you wrote your memoir, which is called The Family Law, when I think you were still in your 20s.
Yeah, is that not
incredible.
Sociopathic?
I mean,
that's deranged,
you haven't even
right?
lived a life yet. What?
I know. It's crazy.
But did you ever think at that time or regret after it came out about writing your family story? Like, once you put that out there, it's out there.
It's a bit of a nuts enterprise, isn't it? And I look back and I think, oh my gosh, I could never write something like that now. Like, how ballsy, how audacious, to your point of audacity, and how kind of revealing. But at the time in my 20s, I was writing a lot for a magazine called Frankie Magazine, which required us to write first person. I realised I could be funny, but also use humour as a way to get to more uncomfortable truths about people, about society, about politics, about race, about anything. And I was like, actually, that's a mode that I like to write in. And there is a lot of stuff about my family where when I was growing up, through my childhood, through my teens, where I felt like a lot of shame about my family. And I got to the point where I realized, actually, there's nothing to be ashamed of. In fact, there's a lot about my family to be celebrated. You know, the fact that we're a deeply dysfunctional family of divorce. You know, I hated that growing up. It felt really exposing to have like the school address book and you could see who all the single parents were. But I was like, wow, what an incredible thing my mum did to raise us through that period. I felt like a lot of cringe about being Asian in a very white part of Australia, but I'm like, actually, no, I really value that about myself. I was like a closeted gay kid, and I was like, actually, that's something to talk about as well. So I think in retrospect, I didn't know it at the time, but I was writing the kind of book I wish I had when I was growing up. I didn't know I was doing that at the time. I just wanted to entertain people with stories about my family. And then, of course, that book was optioned for screen. I got to create and co-write on 3 seasons of The Family Law for SBS.
Is everything okay? With you and Mom?
Just give them space.
You wouldn't know what it's like to slay your guts out for this family. What the hell's a deadbeat?
Why can't you just forgive Dad?
You're a good boy.
Dad, come on. I don't just wake up like this.
Thank goodness someone took the initiative to seek outside help for this family.
Thank you.
My name is Benjamin Law, and this is my family.
It then went to Comedy Central Asia and Hulu in the United States, and I have no regrets about any of that. I think it's really cool, and I'm very grateful to the younger version of myself that he had the chutzpah to think that he should do something like that.
How did your mum, Jenny, and your siblings respond to this juggernaut of your family becoming a television show?
Well, Mum loved it, and she still loves it. And I think part of that comes from the fact that I wrote the book with this impulse that my mum especially should be celebrated. You know, she went through a really tough slog being a single mother of 5 for so long with very little moral support away from her family. But she did an incredible job, you know, with the resources that she had. And I was like, actually, that's an amazing story to tell. And she gets like a lot of love because of it.
People mob her now.
People recognise her in the street. And even though it's a fictional version of her played by Fiona Choi, my mum would end up in like a 2-part ABC documentary with me as well. So people know what she looks like. My dad similarly, you know, slaved away at a restaurant 7 nights, 7 days a week. I don't remember him ever taking a break or a sick leave or holidays. And I think like his work ethic should be celebrated as well. So I think they were great about it. My dad's not a huge reader, and he's like, look, I don't actually think I'm going to read your book. I'm not going to have the time. And I was like, that's cool. But, you know, I write about you in a certain way. How do you feel about being public about that? And he said, well, actually, you know, people would understand if I wrote this story. I would have my own take. Your mum would have her own take. It was a hugely astute thing of him to say. Very liberating. But that's a book, and a TV show is a very different thing in that it's very public. You know, reading is a very private act, whereas watching TV is communal, and there were billboards of the family law throughout the country. And my family were really supportive. I mean, I think they had that same look I had when I said I was writing a book about us, which is like, oh, we support you, but my God, you're insufferable. But they were on set. They hung out with the actors who played versions of them. At one point, my younger sister even dated one of the actors playing my brother, which is wild.
Wow, that is kind of weird, isn't
Lots
it?
of process there.
Whatever gets you through.
Look, it's legal. And so I think we love having this kind of document of a time and place about our family. And very few families get to say, you know, there is this TV show inspired by things we live through. Like, it's a strange club.
Both those books are a love story to your family.
Yeah.
You know, and that's what I think is beautiful about them in the fullness of time. One of the other things, though, about writing so publicly about things, and if we're talking now about your more journalistic writing, is that the pile-on can happen. So when you start to write about something controversial, like you did with your quarterly essay, Moral Panic, which was all about the Safe Schools program, you can cop a lot of heat on that. So how do you deal with that when, you know, it's News Corp in particular, I think were really after you when you published that long-form essay.
So this was an essay about safe schools, but of course, it was going to be an essay that had to be about federal parliament, and it also had to be about News Corp, because those were the grounds in which this moral panic about a very tame program where school principals essentially were signing this optional pledge to try their best to keep LGBTIQA plus students safe at school. You know, it became this story about, oh, they're teaching kids to be gay, they're teaching kids to be trans. And you have to remember that this was during the same-sex marriage postal survey, and that outcome hadn't been decided. And looking back, and when I was writing the essay, it was very clear that the Conservatives realised they had lost the case for same-sex marriage. The stats showed that it would absolutely pass. And so they really needed to fixate this idea of a slippery slope on something else, and that something else was queer children, which I just thought was reprehensible. You know, some of the most vulnerable people in our society, first of all, are kids and teenagers, but then you're thinking of even more marginalised kids and teenagers who have their own concerns at their school, and now suddenly they're in the spotlight for public discussion. I think I wrote that essay from deep anger, actually, and anger can actually be quite clarifying when you're writing it from that impulse. But like you say, you do have to brace yourself for the backlash. And when I was investigating the mechanics of how News Corp really engineers backlash and engineers moral panic. It was clear to me that would come for me. The question was how? And of course, it was quite funny the day that they did. It was the very same day that the quarterly essay about News Corp and about Parliament and about Safe Schools came out. That's not a coincidence, obviously. And it was about a tweet that I had. The tweet was essentially like, oh my gosh, like some of the stuff that's being said in Parliament is so homophobic. Sometimes I wonder whether I should just offer my body up to these homophobic parliamentarians so they can get the homophobia out of their system.
Which, if you're not familiar with Ben's tone on social media, he does like to stir the pot, and there's a dry wit and a bit of a wink at the audience to a lot of the posts that you do.
Sometimes it's dry, sometimes it's quite moist. And of course, they took this tweet to say, oh my gosh, Benjamin is threatening to sexually assault parliamentarians, especially the Liberal parliamentarian Andrew Hastie. And I'm like, oh wow, this is what they're going with. And so I was targeted for about, 10 days, 2 weeks. I was like enemy number one on Sky News and in The Australian and in the News Corp tabloids. Papers for which I'd previously written went after me. And that was a pretty tense period in my life, but at the same time, because I'd already anticipated it, I knew that they were going to act the way that they did. It was pretty predictable, and I needed to use that to publicise what I'd written about them. So every time there was a tweet or a public comment on Facebook or Twitter, I would reply to that tweet or the public comment saying, thank you so much for engaging. This is in the context of me having written this piece about News Corp and about safe schools. And I would encourage you to read the essay so you can see where this moral panic is coming from. And I'd include a link. You can listen to it on audiobook. You can read it as an ebook. I used it for publicity. And what I learned is when things like that happen, there are people who will attack you because they've already made up their minds. And there are other people who will criticize you, and they are doing that in good faith. Most of the time it feels like there's a smaller proportion of people, but I had to be good, and I had to approach those conversations in good faith at identifying which was which, because when a pylon is happening, all of it feels like the same thing. I'm being trolled, I'm being abused, I'm being dragged. And yes, you are, but there will always be a fraction of people who are trying to engage with you because they don't understand or they don't have all the information at hand. And I remember there was one guy on Twitter who criticised me, and I could see that he wasn't an anonymous account. I could see that he was raising kids of school age, and he was a dad, and he thought that what I had said in the public arena was really offensive. And I was like, can I clarify what I said? And also, this is the context in which I said it. I'd encourage you to read it. I can see you're a dad. And within 3 days, he had read my quarterly essay about safe schools. He said, I feel so moved and so grateful for what you've written. I feel like what you've written may equip me to become a better father if one of my kids comes out as trans or queer of some sort. And even if they don't, I think it's made me a better adult who feels more capable of being responsible for the young people in his life. I was like, wow, it's a cliche, but all of that pylon would be worth it if it was for that one father coming out saying that actually my work helped him in some way.
This is Curveball. I'm Kelly Reardon, and in a moment, a shock diagnosis that changed the way Benjamin views himself. This is Curveball, and I'm Kelly Reardon. My guest is the writer and journalist Benjamin Law. Ben, you recently headed off to see a specialist, and it resulted in a 3.5-hour diagnostic test. What made you head off to this specialist?
I have a friend, Amy Tunig. They're an academic and an author, and we DM each other a lot. I love Amy Tunig and their work. And Amy had recent diagnoses for ADHD and other forms of neurospiciness, as we call it. And they were saying, the sign should have been there from the start. I went for my license 5 times, and I'm like, I went for it 7 times. And they're like, and because I've broken, my limbs twice, I'm like, I've broken my limbs 3 times. And they're like, Ben, you might want to get checked out. I'm like, no, I'm not ADHD, because I knew so many people.
You're just a klutz.
I'm just a klutz, right? And I remember when I broke my arm for the third time, my doctor asked me to get a calcium test, like a bone density test.
Like you're a menopausal woman.
Exactly. And the results came back and she said, I've got good news and bad news. The good news is your bone density is great. The bad news is you're effing clumsy. And they even said F, like the proper F word. And I'm like, wow, okay, that's something to digest. But when Amy told me, maybe you should get tested for ADHD, I did think of the people in my life, like Celeste Barber I just worked with for Wellmania, the Netflix show that we made together. And she's really, upfront, candid, public talking about her ADHD. And I was like, well, that's not me. I've got kids in my life with ADHD, lots of friends who've been diagnosed later in life. And I just didn't see myself in their manifestations of ADHD. ADHD manifests or involves a lot of time blindness. I'm an incredibly punctual person. A lot of young people struggle at school. I excelled at school. I really loved school, actually. And I don't know, I was just really skeptical about going to get a diagnosis.
Which doesn't surprise me at all. I've known you for a long time, and to me, you're very focused, very wise, mature beyond your years.
Tell me more, Kelly.
Well, you are.
What else do you notice?
I can remember being in a car on a long trip with you where the rest of us were gasbagging and gossiping, and you were punching out scripts, I think, for the family law in the back of the car in a very focused way.
That
right?
really sounds like me. Yeah.
Where you weren't distracted, and maybe it was hyper-focused.
Yeah, could it have been too focused in retrospect?
So were you shocked? And did you go into denial? I mean, it sounds like there were touches of denial.
Yeah, it sounds like the 7 stages of grief, doesn't it? Well, look, going into the diagnosis, because of course there are huge waiting queues to get ADHD diagnoses. So there was a lag time between when I'd booked the appointment and when I knew I was going in for the appointment. And I said to my family, like, I'm going in for this diagnosis, like for ADHD, because I think it's possible I might have it. And the uniform response was, for sure.
Really?
Even from my brother-in-law, who's a very reserved, non-demonstrative kind of guy. He went, absolutely. And I was like, do all these people know something about myself that I don't? And so going into the diagnosis, to your point, I was bracing myself for the possibility that I did have it, because one of the questions they ask you is, do you have, and have you had from a very young age, a reputation for the following: forgetfulness, being constantly daydreaming, losing track of time, all that sort of stuff? And the answer was yes, yes, and yes. And I think when I became an adult and wanted to be professional, I did things and created systems to mitigate all of those things. So how am I incredibly punctual? My electronic calendar is organised within an inch of its life, from when I wake up at 6:30 to when I'm in bed at 10 o'clock, and there are a system of alarms and calls to tell me this is where you need to be. And so when I told my psychologist that, my clinical psychologist that, they're like, yeah, most people have diaries and systems, but that's a pretty intense one, and not all people, most people don't need that. Neurotypical people don't need that. And I was like, so it was starting to sink in, but the denial was also still there.
Because I've also seen your office where you have lots of sticky notes on your wall, and you also are a multitasker. So you'll be writing a quarterly essay while doing a book, doing a Sydney Morning Herald column, then you're also writing a Netflix series, then you're doing a speech at something, you're MC of this, you're interviewing Martha Stewart on stage. Yeah. So how do you reconcile the fact that you can juggle a lot of things and still bring, I think, sharpness to all of those things? It's not like you're doing a sloppy job of all of them. Somehow you've got a system that makes that work despite your brain not working perhaps the way mine works.
Yeah, I think part of it is in spite of ADHD, in that I'm constantly trying to make sure that I'm not dropping any of those balls, because it's very easy for my brain to drop balls. Like, what was left in the dryer? The iron's still on? Something's burnt down? What? Like, that's a constant. But I also think now that I've got this diagnosis, you know, the way that you describe my career is correct, right? It's a lot of things at once. And a lot of people are, I think, appalled by that, or it sounds really stressful.
Does sound stressful.
Whereas for me, I think my brain and my career has found a match in that I need constant stimulation of multiple things throughout the day. I like changing gears. When I'm doing one task, there's a side of my brain thinking, I can't wait for the next thing that's completely different to this. I've never been in a salaried position where I do one thing. It's constant freelancing across, I guess, different disciplines that sometimes don't even have an overlap. And I like that. But it's funny because, when I got the diagnosis, I'm like, I don't know, because when you're describing this kind of person who does a lot of things at once, that just sounds like a lot of my mates. And the clinical psychologist pointed out, do you think maybe you are attracted to certain people and their company because you have a similar way of engaging with the world? A lot of people in the media and arts who are juggling a lot of things, a lot of people in medicine who have a lot of different specialities, it's often likely they have ADHD. And I'm like, well, I guess that's something to think about.
What was the response of your partner, Scott, who you've been with a very long time, more than 20 years? He's lived with you all of that time. Could he see some of those things and was used to compensating or working around the iron that was left on again?
Well, he definitely does not have ADHD. And in fact, the things that I regard in him as superpowers, I now realise are things that a lot of people with ADHD just don't have, like understanding what's about to happen in the week. I don't understand that unless I'm looking at my diary, but he can talk about what's happening like in 3 months. Oh, there's someone's birthday, we're going to that party. I'm like, how do you know that? Well, it's like, remember when we went to that thing in 2021? And I'm like, what was 2021? How do you know the date, the year even? I'm completely blind to that. In some ways, I'm not sure if surprise is the right word, but there were some things that were starting to click. Like part of the diagnosis is asking, do the closest people in your life even have like nicknames for you about your behavior, for forgetfulness, for distraction? And Scott's always said that I have a jukebox brain. I'm constantly just singing out loud. I'll switch to another song midway through. And he's like, what is going on with your jukebox brain? He also has a really hilariously dark joke because I often leave things in the middle of something. And he's like, like if you were in Wuhan and you were in a lab in Wuhan and you were like investigating coronavirus and you suddenly heard a ding in the microwave for soup, you would absolutely start COVID. And I'm like, yep, that's me. Like, so we have this ongoing joke now that I've got soup brain. I'm like, ooh, soup. And then I just completely forget what I'm talking about and have just unleashed a virus that will change the world forever. So yeah, he was like, I don't think of you as someone with ADHD, but I guess that diagnosis makes sense now that I know about it. So I'm still processing that, and he is too.
I wondered what has changed for you about the way you approach life now. Some people view a diagnosis of ADHD as a bit of a superpower and they think it's something that they can harness more. I wonder how it's impacted the way you go about life.
Yeah. I mean, I don't want to romanticize it because I think it's just the way that I am. I don't think it's necessarily a hindrance either, although I see the ways in which I have, navigated this brain in a society where most people don't have this kind of brain. Look, I think I'm a lot more forgiving of myself now because when I've left many, many, many things on public transport and planes and cars, there is just like this Hansel and Gretel-like trail of things that I've shed behind me in life that I used to really beat myself up about, and I still do to an extent, where you think, as an adult functioning in society, why am I still doing the things that I still did as a kid? When I get hyperfixated on conversations, I'm like, oh my God, I want to know all about you and you want to know all about me. We're best friends now. That intensity of conversation, I think, that's not just my personality. It is, but it's also It's also a manifestation of ADHD, my obsession with taboo topics, which I've since turned into a part of my career.
A very big part, yeah.
Exactly. So I do this back page Q&A in Good Weekend magazine about the stuff you're not supposed to talk about in decent company: death, sex, money, religion, your body, politics. Those are the main things I think are interesting and the things I want to talk to you about. And it's really put me in dicey situations sometimes where people are like, what is this guy? Why is he going into like such inappropriate conversation? I realize for a lot of people with ADHD, that's also a part of our neurotype. So I think I'm more forgiving towards myself, and then also with family and friends who, look, I'm not a clinical psychologist. I don't want to diagnose anyone off the bat, but I have strong suspicions now about who in my life has an atypical neurotype. And rather than losing my patience with them, you know, these people I care about, I find I have a lot more patience with them because I realize a lot of people have had a lot of patience with me.
You did Survivor.
Yes, I did.
Now, I need you to explain Survivor. I have never watched an episode.
Oh, are you ready for this? This is going to be a whole other podcast episode.
What is it about this show? Why did you want to go on it? What was the experience like?
I remember watching the early single-digit seasons of American Survivor. They're coming up to like their 50th season, right? It's been an absolute phenomenon. And reality competitive TV really kicked off with this show, the popularity of it. And I was, of course, captivated by the stunning locales. It's a little bit of tourism porn as well, to see all of these lush environments. There's a little bit of schadenfreude porn as well, seeing these people go through starvation. You see people at their lowest points. There's a little bit of glam competitiveness as well. Like I love like It's a Knockout and Gladiators back in the day. So there's a lot of challenges that you have to do that are very much like those. But I'm also a fan of human interaction, anthropology and politics. And really at the core of Survivor, for all of the challenges and famous people starving on an island, it really is about people finding a way through when they are deprived of everything, when they're deprived of their loved ones, when they're deprived of food, when they're deprived of comfort. You are brought down to your most base self. And what does that look like when you're trying to survive and not get voted out and build trust with people that you've literally just met? So it's this great social experiment. And why did I want to sign up to it? I don't know. I think it's, for me, the question is, why not rather than why? So when I was approached, I was like, in my late 30s, it would be the last year of my 30s. I thought it was a great way to see out an absolutely bonkers decade. And I was a huge fan of the show. You know, as someone who works in scripted TV, I really respect good storytelling. And I think Survivor is really good storytelling. And I wanted to see how far I could push myself.
Do you think it's about being likable though? Like being the least offensive person in the cast that everyone just likes enough so that you never get voted off? Or is it much more tactical than that?
I think likability can be an asset, but it's like superheroes or baseball cards. Like likability might be your asset, but your mercenary brain that's geared towards politics might be your asset for someone else, right? When you look at the scope of people who've won, say, Australian Survivor, which I think is now in its 10th season, I was in season 8, there's a huge range of people who've won, like a physiotherapy student who studied pain, who also was a dancer, Shane Gould, you know, a former Olympic great who won, I think in her 60s and was the oldest winner of Survivor across the world. You've got someone like Pia Miranda, you know, looking for Alibrandi star, who used her likability and her acting to deceive people and get ahead. And then you've got someone like Mark Wales, who's like a former army guy who was just a challenge beast, like David Janae, a former model as well. And they were always going to have a target on their back, but they could physically endure through challenges to get them through the other side. So everyone has different assets coming into the game, and it's about how you leverage them to be tactical and be strategic. So there's a bit of warfare going on.
What about the casting? I imagine part of the appeal for you is, hey, there's an Asian on Survivor.
Yeah.
How did they represent you on the show? And when they're casting and going through the casting process, are they looking for those archetypes, the villain, the good guy, the fit guy, the dorky Asian guy?
Absolutely. And in fact, you know, when there are people in my life who want to get on the show and they send in audition tapes, my advice to them, also coming from the TV industry, not reality, but if I was a reality TV producer, you know, you are looking for archetypes, and I knew what I could provide them, which is the bleeding heart, self-righteous, left-wing, Asian gay nerd who presents as a hero, because our season was heroes versus villains and I was cast as a hero, but could be diabolically inclined. And so I brought that to my interviews. I brought that to the show as well, because there's so little that's in your control in terms of how you want to be framed. But I knew the game that I wanted to play. And yeah, I got to be hero and villain. I got to have embarrassing and triumphant moments. I got to win and lose. And even though I didn't win, spoiler alert, I felt that I got to play a very complete game in that way. Like I kind of got what I wanted out of it. And, you know, the public reaction to me was really varied as well, which I also thought was cool. I wasn't this two-dimensional person to the audience out there either. So I thought that was really fun.
Is what happens on the island when you were there, is that what ends up on the TV show? Like, how different was your experience being there and what was going on amongst the cast versus when you actually saw the edited TV show?
Well, what's going on out there is that we're all going through mental breakdowns, physical and mental.
Like, really?
Yeah, look, physical breakdown in terms like I lost over 10% of my starting body weight in 22 days.
Wow.
You lose a lot of weight. You literally starve out there. I lost chunks of my flesh out there. Like I almost got foot rot, like what soldiers got in World War I. And that really messes with you because you've only met these people for the first time and you know you, like the rest of them, everyone's acting against everyone's best interests. And that's really, really tough. And you start spiraling a little. And the challenge is like, can you contain that spiraling to push through? In terms of what's filmed, we're filmed 24 hours a day. And so you're never going to get the whole complex, complete story of what happened out there. What they need is a story that people at home can understand. And so when I talk to the other contestants, especially in my season, they're like, oh, they didn't get this. Oh, they didn't put that in the show. I'm a TV producer.
Yeah, you could see it.
And I'm like, well, that's not an interesting story.
There's no drama there.
Or
no
that
moment
story,
of reflection.
That story has a dead end, you know? Like, that's not interesting. Like, they're trying to build a story for the audience to really pull through the entire season. And so I came out of that show with massive respect for these show producers who have got, frankly, a mess to start with and have to create some sort of order out of it. There was tension, there was comedy. I mean, I think our season is probably the best season of Australian Survivor, but of course I'm biased.
All right, I'm going to watch it. You, of course, hang out on these tropical islands with all sorts of famous Australians, but you also hang out with international superstars like Martha Stewart. What was she like?
Well, what she was like was what she was like on the stage, which is very public Martha Stewart, because this is such a boss move. She basically told us in the venue, I'm going to be there half an hour before I'm on the stage and then I'll leave pretty quickly. And so I respected that. You know, she's 83 years old. She doesn't have time to waste.
No sound check, people.
Absolutely. So she arrives. I go to the green room. I meet her and her entourage of 3 very underslept Americans. And she is radiant and divine, partly because she's flown first class, but also how remarkable because she's 83 years old and she's with it. She's ready to go onto stage in front of like 3,500 people. I meet her and the first thing she says to me is, I was told to look out for you. I've heard things about you, which is so deliciously unnerving.
What have you heard?
Exactly. And so I play along because, she kind of has the charm of a catty gay man, and I can do that. So I said, oh, look, all the rumours are true, especially the defamatory ones, Martha. And she said, well, look, if they are, you better be interesting. And that was our call time, like, you better be interesting.
And now you're on stage.
And now we're on stage. And I've told people that story since, and they were like, oh my gosh, what an awful thing to say, to unnerve you, to knock you off your perch. But my sweet spot is powerful women that people find intimidating, people who have a reputation for being like difficult or whatever. I love those women because obviously they're where they are because they've really pushed through some shit, right? Especially if you're Martha Stewart. She was working on Wall Street when there were no women toilets, within the building in which she worked. She's lived all of these lives and she's endured, she's come out of a prison sentence and has this renaissance of public affection and respect. That warrants respect. And I don't know, I get a big buzz when I'm around people like that.
One of the things I think not many people know about you is the love story with your partner, Scott.
Oh, yeah.
How did you meet?
It's disgusting, but we went to the same high school. We went to a very big high school and we weren't in the same year level. So, when you're in a different year level in that kind of school, you may as well be in a different galaxy.
Planet. Yeah.
But we did know of each other. Apparently he found me intimidating, which I love. And I thought he was sweet. But then we went on a high school music tour together through the Bible Belt of America, which was the strangest thing to go through with other people in your school. And I think we bonded. He was quite misanthropic about the entire thing, which I thought was kind of cool. And then what happened? I went to university. When I came back for the summer holidays, I was working at my dad's restaurant, and lo and behold, my dad had hired Scott and he looked really different. And I was like, he looks handsome. He is cute. When we work the New Year's Eve shift that goes till like 2 a.m. and after we've cleaned up after all the drunk people, I'm going to take him out and get him drunk on Passion Pop, with his consent, of course, and see what happens next. And the rest is history. It's been decades plural, which is wild. And I don't think that's about anything we've done. I think sometimes like you luck on the right person and you will change and you will grow and you'll become different people because that's what life is. The question is, are you able to do that together and will you still be compatible in amongst all those changes? And weirdly, it has worked out. We've built this life together, which is really great. And, I love him more and in different ways as time goes on. Yeah, I'm a very lucky piece of shit.
He is. He's a beautiful man. Finally, what is still in the tank for you? What other things would you like to do? You've done the books, the magazines, you're on television, you're doing Survivor, all of the things. Is there something you haven't done or you're about to do that excites you?
Yeah, look, in terms of stuff that I'm about to do, there's a play coming up at Melbourne Theatre Company. That's an adaptation of my late friend Corey Taylor's last book, her memoir about dying. It's called Dying a Memoir. And I've written plays before, but I think there's something different about honouring the legacy of a friend. So I'm both excited and terrified about that. I've just written my first movie script. That's something I've never done before, and we'll see what happens next with that. There's 2 new book projects I want to pursue, but they're just in not even embryonic, like they're in zygote form at the moment in terms of what those books are and what I want to do with them. There's heaps I want to do, but I also think that it's not necessarily the exclusive center of what I want to do. I'm in my 40s now. My 20s and 30s was so hyperfixated on my career, and I still love working and I still love doing the work. But there are other things as well. Like I really want to be a good uncle. I really want to be a good friend. I really want to be a good boyfriend. I want to be a good son. I want to be a good hiking buddy. we've both entered this hiking era of our lives,
I know,
Kelly.
it's just ridiculous, isn't it? Who are we? We both grew up in families that never went camping.
I know.
And now we just love to put a backpack on and
Oh my gosh.
trek around the
I own a
place.
carabiner and an ultralight tent. Who am I?
I think we're middle-aged.
Yeah,
I think that's it.
exactly. And I love this whole world that's opened up to me. I'm like, Paddy Palin, if you want to sponsor me, I'm around. But there are hikes that I want to do. There are things outside of paid employment that I want to do, while at the same time, there are a lot of work projects that I've got my eye on. Probably too many for this lifetime, but apparently that might be ADHD.
Well, thank you for sharing your story. I think it'll help a lot of people as well. It's been so great to talk to you on Curveball.
Thanks, Kelly. What a pleasure.
Benjamin Law. He's a writer, broadcaster, cultural critic, and as we've heard, someone who's faced some personal and public curveballs with honesty, humour and heart. Curveball's produced by Dead Set Studios. This episode was produced by Sarah Dabro and edited by Gia Moylan. If you liked this episode, do leave us a review or share it with someone navigating their own unexpected chapter. You can find all of our episodes at curveballshow.com. Curveball is produced on the lands of the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation. We acknowledge the traditional custodians of country throughout Australia and their connection to land, sea and community. We pay our respects to elders past, present and emerging.